Right, Josh, welcome back to Football Unspoken. So, we've got a refereeing and law debate for you today. But before we jump into that, can you tell me which player has the most amount of red cards?
Who has the list? Players that
Is he?
come to mind is Joey Barton. Um, Jibril Cisse.
No, it's not a bad shout, but no, it's not. I would be gobsmacked if you got this because it's a guy called Gerardo Bedoya from Colombia. He's got 46 red cards in his career. The next highest, Sergio Ramos with 29. So that man loved a rogue tackle, clearly. He loved a little two-footer. But launching off of that, so we can see this year that in the last 2 years, to be honest, there's been a lot of frustration around refereeing in the Premier League and the Champions League, the way the laws seem to change between which competition you're in, whether VAR is implemented or not, how it's implemented, how quickly it needs to move. So, my question to you is when you compare it to potentially even other sports, is football lagging a little bit behind in terms of the implementation of rules and technology with their laws?
Oh, tough one. I'm gonna say no, just because I think football is a very different beast to the other sports. That's not me getting on my high horse and burning off into the sunset, going, "Well, it's a better sport, and therefore no one's responsible." I more just mean the problem I'm seeing is that the Premier League seems to have its own way of running VAR, and then the Champions League has their own system, and so does La Liga, for example. And there's almost these nuances of what's a handball and what's not a handball, and how much do they show in terms of the offside and things. Because I think is it La Liga they do when they do the offside, they do that white line across when you get on the screen, you can see how much of the players over the line. But the Premier League just does the draw of the line, and there's all these different cases which kind of lead in the minute situations to a different outcome. So in that way, it makes it difficult. Where you got tennis or cricket or these sports that are maybe using their own version of a VAR system, it seems a lot more cut and dry, where it's yes and no for what is out, what's not out, what would be a point awarded, what would not be a point awarded. So if you feel like that's football is a sport falling behind, then I guess so. But I would say football's harder to govern because you got all these different leagues who seem to be wanting to do penalties or handballs in their own way.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of where I come from because obviously I understand that cricket and tennis are very static sports, and what I mean when I say that is they're very stop start. It's quite easy to implement technology to be able to look at each ball, and whereas with your free flowing games, it can be harder, especially in a football sense. But the one kind of rebuttal I have to that is rugby because rugby is still a very free flowing sport. At the end of the day, it's a lot of open play that needs to be covered. And I think they do it quite well. In terms of, and I'll talk about that in terms of their technology, but the thing I wanted to touch on there was the difference in the rules. And I think this is where football in itself needs to sit down. UEFA needs to sit down and go, this is the law. If you're playing in a UEFA sanctioned competition, this is the laws, and I don't care. FIFA need to do the same thing. This is the laws. This is exactly how handball works. Because the problem you're looking at it with handball and I'll go specifically with handball is that your Champions League handballs are nowhere near a handball in the Premier League. And that did Newcastle last year. And I think it did Man United in Europa this last week. Bruno Fernandes getting a very harsh handball. And no one wants to see that at the end of the day. As a football fan, I don't care if a guy's going to jump up and his arm's a little bit away from his body. It has to go somewhere. I'm more concerned if his arm's a foot above his head and it hits his hand, then it's a handball. And I just think there needs to almost be a clearer guideline on exactly what the law is for all the competitions. And I think that's the problem because I think about it in rugby. The way they deal with it in rugby is they will talk through the conversation through the decision, and that conversation is broadcast not only to the people watching at home, but you can actually buy like ref mics or ref earphones that you can then hear in the stadium what the referee is talking about. So you're actually spoken through the entire decision. Whereas I think the problem is that there seems to almost be this reluctance to have an open discussion about why refereeing decisions are being made.
This problem with the Champions League about what's a red card in the UEFA rules compared to say a Premier League has been a problem for quite a number of years. I actually remember back, we'll see how much ball knowledge I have right now, but I remember in Ferguson's last season, Manchester United played against Real Madrid in the Champions League. Do you remember if it was quarters or semis? But they played Real Madrid. And in the second leg, in the important game, Nani got a very soft red card. I think he challenged Modric, but I could be wrong, but it was definitely Nani who got the red, and it was Ferguson's last season. So I feel like that's some good ball knowledge right there. But they got a very soft red card. They end up losing the tie overall by 1 goal in aggregate as a result of that red card. And that goes back to in the Premier League, it would never have been a red card. And so what I'm saying is this has been an ongoing problem for decades at this point, where UEFA does not have the same red card ruling, for example, as the Premier League. And I tend to agree with you that for the consistency of football as a global sport, the next step is probably to align all refereeing standards to one. It's not a rule book, but it's an interpretation of what a handball is. Now, the problem in football about them not releasing the audio of what the players and the referee, or more the referee, are saying about the decision is it automatically makes, particularly the team that's been done by the decision, it automatically makes that team and their fans assume that there's some level of corruption or that the referee has an agenda against their team because the decision's gone against them and they weren't privy to the discussion point. You gave some examples and I'll throw in an Arsenal one because why not? All of our teams have been done more than everyone else's, of course. But I remember a couple of seasons ago when Arsenal conceded that goal against Brentford, they ended up drawing the game where the offside lines weren't even drawn, for example. And it would have been really useful in that scenario to have heard the audio between the referee. Now, I know the counter argument for what I'm saying is that I believe the reason they haven't implemented that is they're trying to reduce abuse going towards the referees rather than encourage it. And that kind of implementation tends to encourage abuse that referees receive. And ultimately, I believe rugby's meant to be the sport of gentlemen. There's that saying, I'm sure you can remind me about the
Yeah, rugby is a sport for hooligans played by gentlemen. Football's a sport for gentlemen played by hooligans.
Exactly. And I think the fans seem to mirror that pretty well. So the thing with rugby is the rugby fans seem a bit more appreciative and respectful with their referees, as well as, they've got really done well in rugby is yellow cards, which are more punishable or punishing in rugby compared to football for dissent. If you show any dissent, you're off basically in rugby. Football hasn't quite got to that point, and I think that's why they're also scared to do the audio footage because you'll hear a lot of swearing basically from the players. So there's a lot of grey, murky waters for football globally to sort out before they can start releasing referee audios.
Yeah, those are all good points, but again, this is where I come back to the thing. I would just think they're lagging behind, and whether or not they've got a genuine reason for that, I personally don't think they do. But I think whether or not they believe they have a genuine reason for that, it doesn't really matter because they are falling behind in terms of these. And then you were speaking about last point I wanted to talk about was the descent towards referees, time wasting, simulation, all these kind of acts that we've spoken about for 20. I mean, well, I've followed football for 25 years pretty much, and I've even back then you were still talking about players diving, players talking back to referees, time wasting, all of this. And I sit there and I'm like, there are definitely ways that you could, or things you could take from other sports that you could implement to help cut that back. Why not, for example, with time wasting? Unless the ball is in play, clock stops and we play 75-minute games or 80-minute games. Like rugby, play 40-minute halves, 80-minute games. Anytime that ball is off the field, clock stops. It's that simple. Football's almost seems to be unwilling to evolve with the times, and that unwillingness is starting to frustrate the fans a lot. At the end of the day, the kind of big thing that I would like to take away, beyond everything else we've spoken about here, the big takeaway from me is the communication element. And I think every other sport does a really good job of communicating exactly why the decision is being made, not just to the players on the field, but also to the fans at home and in the stadium. So I think we've kind of come to a bit of a consensus that there are definitely elements of football refereeing that's lagging. Would you would agree with that?
Yes, for sure. There's always been. I'm just going to end off by saying this is amusing. Normally, when we're having a football refereeing discussion, it's about, oh, there's just been this horrendous referee decision that's been made. Oh, they're terrible. I actually think this season they've got it largely right in the Premier League compared to previous seasons. Of course, there's going to be anomalies. I'm not saying there hasn't been a single mistake, but you compare the mistakes in previous seasons where there's been multiple huge mistakes. I think of Liverpool last season against Tottenham. There were some huge mistakes in that game, right? Multiple, more than one. Things like incidents like that just aren't happening so far this season. So I think they actually are moving in the right direction. I wanted to add that in because we love beating up our referees as football fans.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I do agree with you. I think it's been a better season overall, but at the end of the day, I think there's definitely things that football needs to improve on. I think there's things that they could take from other sports, and I do still think that they're lagging behind, specifically on that communication element. There's other elements that can't be implemented in football. Happy to agree on that. But yeah, football, in my mind, is definitely lagging behind some other sports. But I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. Do you think that football is lagging behind, or do you think that football is just too hard to referee like that and they need to find other ways of dealing with it? Let us know in the comments below. And until next time, this has been Football Unspoken. Bye for now.